2 years, 100,000 students and professors, and over 1 million peer evaluations. With Kritik, 1 million peer evaluations. That is a lot of evaluations, and there's lots to learn from it. There's 3 areas that I'm going to extract here that we've really learned about. Hey, these things have really gone into strong courses that incorporate Kritik and peer evaluation, and we're not limiting it, but these are the 3 that really have stood out to us over this period of time. The first being culture matters. Classroom culture is everything, as you probably have heard, but in this case, there's no exception. The professors who have found the most success with peer learning with Kritik are the ones that have really taken that effort to build a classroom culture that is strong, that is inclusive, that is open.
From day one for all of my courses, it doesn't matter, undergraduate, graduate, professional, whatever. I do my best at identifying the importance of inclusivity in the learning space. So whether the class is for grades, whether the class is for pass-fail, from day one, I actually go over some important best practices for learning and what a vibrant learning space looks like. And I essentially try to remind kids of why we love to learn. Why are we in school?
And I think the more that I do these in-class rundowns of what the feedback was that I got on Kritik and what my feedback would be, and comparing those two and analyzing not only what the correct feedback is supposed to be, but the process of getting there, the thought processes that you have to go through in order to come up with, how do I determine what a good paper is? These rubric criterias, I don't just grab them out of the ether, there are these things that are components of a really strong paper. So how do we arrive at these areas? And doing that in class together, I think has really done a lot for building the students' confidence.
Second, consistency is key. So like anything, peer assessment, evaluative skills, that's a skill that needs to be developed over time. And the feedback process is really important here, but they need to have an opportunity to actually receive that feedback and apply that feedback onto the next assignment. So we recommend that when you're using Kritik, you incorporate a minimum of 5 activities. This allows students to have the opportunity to build off the previous activity with peer assessment and incorporate that feedback onto the next.
Students become better graders, and then those students who receive feedback become better writers. So that's the idea, I think.
You want to have some sort of authentic connection with somebody else, I think. And when you see people's work, especially when you're getting into some of the more personal stories, I encourage people to tell whatever story they feel comfortable telling, but as a result, you end up getting some really deeply personal narratives that are quite moving. And when you have that kind of connection, you're like, okay, now I feel like I know you. I feel like I can trust you. I feel simpatico with you.
They were pretty effective in the way they worked. I also try to sort of keep them in the same group, which helped because they had that experience of working together on assignment and then working together throughout the during class throughout the semester. But I felt like that that empowered them to actually speak up and engage and actually participate more.
Their final submissions are stronger than what they used to be because it's gone through a number of renditions and they've gotten a lot of feedback from other people, including me, that if they're diligent and pay attention to that, they're going to address all of those issues.
Structured freedom to think critically. And this is a really big part of the peer assessment process. I mean, with Kritik, you're providing the structure through the rubrics, through the learning objectives and instructions, and spotlighting content, which is really showing strong evaluations or strong work. So it's allowing them the structure, but also the space. So with peer assessment, you give them all that information, and then they go into it and they have the freedom to provide feedback, written feedback to their peers. And they know that even though they're doing the same activity, that written feedback is really going to differ, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a really positive thing because we know that if a student receives, 3, 4, 5 pieces of feedback on their work and it all looks at different aspects and highlights different areas for improvement or different strengths, that will only allow them to progress even more so for their next work.
Because we were all talking about the same craft points, the same objectives, the students were able to point out what was strong and also what wasn't working in a way that actually was helpful for him. But it was interesting. It took him a while to figure that out, but then he was like, oh, this is a gift we're giving each other, actually. And he was one of the ones that was like, oh yeah, and I could use this in my career.
Some of the students though got it, better than others. And they'd be like, oh, I didn't even understand any of that until I read your summary. So that was one way in which they got some feedback from their peers that helped them understand what the person was even talking about.
In the next coming years, there's going to be even more to gain, more insights through professor conversations, through workshops, research, etc. So stay tuned for more updates and insights from Kritik.